Good morning, everyone. Caresoft Technology would like to welcome you to our 3CLogic webinar, How the State of Delaware's Department of Labor Streamlined Citizen Services for Unemployment and Fraud Claims. At this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to our speakers. G and Daryl, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Heather, for the introduction. As Heather mentioned, my name is Guillaume. I'm a representative here of 3CLogic. We are a cloud contact center platform. It really is my pleasure to welcome Daryl Scott. Daryl, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Thanks, Chief.
To join and tell your story. How are you doing?
I'm doing well today. Thank you.
So Daryl, I thought, one of the first things that we could start with is maybe give you a minute to kind of talk a little bit about the Department of Labor for the state of Delaware. I know when you and I spoke offline, I was stunned at what is it you guys do and the amount that you guys process.
Great. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and tell a little bit about the Department of Labor and specifically the Division of Unemployment Insurance. Our mission, and we try and strive that we're a mission-based driven organization, right? We're here to provide financial assistance to those that are unemployed due to no fault of their own. And the pandemic and subsequent declared state of emergency in Delaware challenged our organization and our state to provide that necessary financial assistance. To give you a little background, we typically in 2018-19 we did 32,000 claims each year, paid out between $65 and $70 million in benefits, and we would receive about 110 to 125,000 calls on an annual basis. In the last 2 years, to give you a little perspective, we received 350,000 claims, paid out more than $1.5 billion in benefits, and received 1.4 million or more than 1.4 million calls during that period. We're a small and mighty team of about 88 people. We peaked at more than 250, predominantly through contractual resources that we brought on. And I'd be remiss if I didn't, begin each conversation with saying that the work on behalf, I'm here on behalf of the team that works day in, day out to provide these vital services. And if it weren't for their sheer grit, determination, and willingness to show up every day to provide the services, it would have been a much different outcome. So I'm very, pleased to be here on behalf of the hundreds of people working in the Department of Labor and providing these vital benefits. So
what I'm hearing you say, Daryl, is things got a little bit stretched or a little bit busy for a period of time, right? Compared to the average day?
Just a little bit, yeah.
All right. So, but, that also coincided with or maybe it bubbled up some of the challenges that you guys, were addressing or having to work through at the same time, right? You want to talk through that a little bit?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we were in the process of planning was centralization of services. So our calls were dropped. We had 4 locations in the state of Delaware. We were dropping calls in the state of Delaware, mail to the state, to each office, faxes, and really had no central infrastructure to manage customer contact. And I know we're here to talk about, the integration of 3CLogic into our ServiceNow, but ServiceNow was one of the first systems we deployed to provide, enhance our capabilities to manage this response. But, we weren't centralized from an operational standpoint. The tools, we had multiple systems that weren't well integrated, that again challenged the agents to be able to get access to information very quickly and resolve a claimant's issues. Fraud, which is one of the key drivers of some of the volume we faced, challenged us even further because we were faced with a unique type of fraud in identity theft. And not to go into a lot, prior to the pandemic, it was primarily fraud that people didn't report returning to work or their wages correctly. So this really challenged us to be able to work through an increased volume and a unique call type as well. And so, and the other from a pure volume perspective is, as you might imagine, websites had to be updated. Our phone system wasn't of size to be able to handle the increased call volume that we face. So in addition to adding people, decentralized systems, not well integrated business processes and systems, we really challenged our team to provide vital services during a period of great need.
And a lot of it was manual, right? I'm looking at the last point,
But
right? The fact that there were so many mundane tasks, right?
absolutely.
So,
Well,
right.
and one of the key drivers is, again, it was, we just didn't have automation in place to be able to do things. So, and I think the business case we're going to talk about today is just, be able to handle a customer contact and not have somebody sitting there, transcribing voicemails all day and getting it to somebody to be able to respond.
Right, right. So, I mean, if we talk about the impact, I think you highlighted the fact that, again, you went from a couple 100,000, maybe 100,000 plus calls a year to almost a couple hundred a month. Talk a little bit about sort of just the impact. I mean, in addition, of course, I'm sure it had some mental impact, right? Just trying to keep up with it all.
It did. The one thing that I will say, and as the slide notes, that going from 115,000 calls a year to 190,000 in May of 2020, just completely overwhelmed the system and the process. And unfortunately, in our business, there's somebody behind that phone call that's trying to get vital financial assistance at a time when they're not working, right? So in addition to the volume, the inability to handle the calls, we had many people who were, unemployment is a very stressful time, right? One of the most stressful events an individual could go through. So again, there's a human element here that we understood we were impacting by our inability to respond. The other is, with that volume, there's a point where you can throw or brute force your way through things. But with this kind of volume, there was just no way we were going to be able to do that. I mean, we leased additional space to house people, but that takes time, right, to build out and support. And so we had to look for ways to use technology smarter, to help us address this volume. And that's where the 3CLogic ServiceNow, solution really came into helping us address this business issue.
So let's talk a little bit about that. And before you dive into the 3CLogic piece, I mean, you already sort of, gave a passing mention to the fact that one of the first steps you guys took in your consolidation efforts was moving to ServiceNow, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that it was on our identified gaps in our technology ecosystem, right? Is that we didn't have a CRM, among other things. But one of the things we were looking at is, again, self-help, which ServiceNow with Virtual Agent gave us some ability to provide some self-service that wasn't existent before, gave us the ability to add chat as a potential means of quickly, resolving some issues. It also gave us the ability to extend our technology platform so that we could bring in a third-party call center to assist. So again, we have a very secure environment where our system of record is a mainframe, very tight controls around who has access. So ServiceNow was an integral part of our ability to extend our reach and the quantity of people that had the ability to provide assistance.
But just to be clear, so you add self-service, you add the knowledge portal, right? You add chat. So you're trying to give a couple different means of interactions between the citizens, and obviously that you serve, especially at a time of need, right? You mentioned
Absolutely.
it, and not just any time of need, it's a pretty stressful one. But people are still calling, right, Daryl? So talk to me about that a little bit, right?
So, initially knowing that people were calling to ask for information, we had to outsource, sort of move initially our call volume to a technology partner that had, IVR capability, using the IVR to try and deliver information. But again, the end result is, when it was landing at the agent, there wasn't a whole lot of information that was captured as, as part of that interaction. And so adding ServiceNow, again, if you started a chat, the ability to transcribe or transition that, that contact to a phone call, to be able to capture that history. So if you called back, you had that information. And then adding 3CLogic, and I guess we'll talk about this more, is the ability to eliminate the lookup. So again, you've got a system that's got a portion of the data that's available, to be able to identify the individual, look it up, and try and get the case assigned to the right person. Took time. And so integrating 3CLogic into that CRM allowed for the screen pop and other capability to streamline that interaction.
So just to recap, and you now have ServiceNow sort of as that central system of record, right? Single source of truth. And you've already built some digital channels for it, but people still call, especially when things are time sensitive, right? And so how can you still make sure that the experience is as efficient for the citizen, right? Getting to the right person who can help as much as it is for the agent. And, and it's that marriage between that system of record you guys have now platformed on ServiceNow, and obviously your ability to leverage, 3CLogic and its voice workflows that allow us to create that intelligent experience. And I think, one of the things we'll talk about is also your move towards insourcing of some of the operations as well.
Correct. Yeah, we were very fortunate to have the partnership we had. CareSoft and the ability to facilitate the procurement of vital tools and services, the technology partner to help us with our ServiceNow deployment, and that was a combination of our internal technology organization and another partner, and then the 3CLogic team sort of being added to that is again a great combination of technology and business, business partnerships to help us manage through this. Again, in a crisis of this level, you really are looking for, people that are going to be in the foxhole, fighting with you each and every day to try and, deliver on the mission that you have. And we found that in the partnerships that, in the partners that I just described.
So let's talk about some of the examples, right? I think we agreed on 2 examples just to kind of give an idea of the art of the possible,
Absolutely.
right? Because there are a few things that we've been able to accomplish together.
Yep.
So for our audience, I'm just going to sort of paint a picture here. And before we dive into the after, you can give me an idea of what would have been the experience beforehand. But let's imagine you have John. John's a citizen, and he notices something a little bit odd. He's getting notifications regarding his new unemployment claim, which oddly enough, John did not apply for unemployment.
Right.
So there's a concern on John's behalf that there may be some fraud, and obviously he finds himself eager to try and reach obviously your department, and gets redirected to a voicemail inbox. In part because there's such a long hold, because everyone like John is trying to get services. Talk to me a little bit about what that experience was before.
So I touched on this a little bit earlier, is that the type of fraud that was being perpetrated against the UI program in Delaware and across the nation was different than what we had seen. And so we had a group called Benefit Payment Control, which manages sort of fraud and sort of investigates fraud. And we quickly realized that, one, we didn't have enough people. And somehow initially, the first phone number that got published was the manager of that group. So if you had a fraud issue, you were calling a phone number, and a couple of things happened. One is volume overwhelmed the system again. And the manager had no ability really to answer the call more than, take messages, right? And as messages were being recorded, having somebody listen to, transcribe, and try and get it to somebody to respond to. And to give, the audience a little bit of a scale, we at one point, I know, had more than 30,000 reported cases of identity theft. So we're not talking about a couple hundred, phone calls and emails. You're talking about, tens of thousands that were coming in. So again, the experience was leave a message, hope that somebody was going to listen to it, transcribe it, get it assigned and respond to. And, again, the integration of 3CLogic to be able to, one, capture, record, transcribe, assign the case, and get it, captured in a way that we could manage and measure the response, was a critical, great first step to try and help us, respond to this issue. So as you've got, one, they call, the 3CLogic auto transcribes the voicemail. The workflow allows it to assign the case. And then in this case, there's a lot of work involved in sort of validating whether it's fraud. In some cases, in the case you identified, John didn't apply. So the first thing we wanted to do is make sure that we got the claim identified to try and stop payments before they occur. And if payments occurred, sort of a whole nother work stream that was identified and put in place to be able to manage.
What we're talking about here is not whether or not you are going to eventually get through the 30,000 claims, but could you get through them in a timely fashion, right? Because the faster you get the claim, one, recognize, which is where, let's remove the need to manually transcribe, because that's slow at best.
Oh my.
Can we automate that whole process and just get it into the claim workflow, which you were using ServiceNow for? It's that time to response, which is what adds a lot of value, right? In addition to just the efficiency of it all.
Absolutely. And what's not noted here is the initial capture of this was in a spreadsheet, right? So you can imagine,
Right.
and then you've got multiple people trying to work. Then we added another facility with additional resources. And so getting this centralized in ServiceNow and captured in a more efficient way gave us visibility, right, to the problem and the ability to mobilize and add resources. As we expanded our footprint from a office space, we were able to add resources and dedicate to the to this particular business case.
Yep. And someone else, you can devote them to doing something a little bit more interesting. Because I know after a while I get tired of transcribing manually 30,000 voicemails. I'm just saying.
Allison did not enjoy that part of her job, I can tell you that.
I bet. So the other use case was, okay, so we managed to sort of streamline together ServiceNow, 3CLogic, and of course with your team, we came up with a process that helped really automate all of that. So as soon as you're leaving a voicemail, it becomes an event, a workflow in ServiceNow that gets assigned, right? So
Right.
John leaves a voicemail, and in relatively short order, his claim is making its way through. But of course, I know in my case, when there's fraud, patience is a virtue, one that's usually thin.
Right.
So I'm going to call, where are we with the fraud? How bad is it? And so on and so forth. So in this case, here's John following up on the fraud claim that he submitted obviously the other week. And he just wants to get an update. In the past, what was that experience? If someone wanted to call in and get an update on the status of their claim, walk me through that.
Well, so again, before the integration of this information in ServiceNow is extremely difficult, because the odds that you were going to reach the same, investigator, or resource that you spoke to before was slim, right?
Right.
And so the ability to have access to the information, be able to communicate an update, and in some cases, again, it requires a submission of additional information from the claimant, is just very difficult to be able to manage that. So there's no kind way of saying it was not a good customer experience in any respect. And for the workers, and as I mentioned earlier, I mean, there was a lot of stress anyway because of the increased volume, and the pressure from claimants to get these issues addressed, is that it made for a really difficult, and I would say horrible work experience, right? Which, as you know, is challenging. It just adds additional stress to an already stressful work environment. So integrating the solution, the first thing is the auto pop. I mean, getting the information, being able to identify that it's Daryl calling. I have a case for Daryl, and for the person who's answered the phone to be able to quickly identify and see, hey, is there an update, to be able to communicate it. Again, given the volume and the backlog, there may not be an update, but the ability to identify the individual, their case, and communicate that in a more efficient manner. Small, I guess small benefit in some respects, but very meaningful when you think about they're not waiting on hold while someone's trying to research and find information in a spreadsheet somewhere else, right?
Yeah, and of course, these are things that you can also, down the road together. I know we have there's some future use cases that we're looking to address, but doing self-service, right? So I could call, and maybe I don't, are there use cases where you don't actually have to reach an agent, but you can still satisfy the citizen's inquiry, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some things we could talk about as we go forward about how we continue to enhance that, our ability to serve customers.
So, all this sounds great, right? At the end of the day, I mean, these are all use cases I think everyone can wrap their head around. But then, of course, the obvious question is, okay, well, how meaningful is the impact, right? Can you put it in metrics? Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. So again, we're a small state. So, we started at 88 people. There are UI departments in the nation that had more than 1,000 or thousands of individuals. So just think about scale, right? I mean, so 650 hours, we estimated that, saved in manual task and work, just in the first 6 months of about 650 hours. I'm trying to think of, not quite an FTE, but again, we were able to make the work more meaningful and more impactful, right, for the people that are working. As far as the handle time, one, initially getting through to us was extremely difficult. And then to have a long hold time, you've got sort of a double whammy, right? Not enough people. And then when they get you, you're taking longer to process that call. So getting the reduction in handle time, materially impacts your capacity, right? The ability to handle more, more customer contacts. And as you can see, is sort of increasing the, our in-center, call capacity, right? So a corresponding impact of, giving us the ability to manage, 6 times more customer interactions, on a daily basis. And again, may sound like small numbers, but every contact we know is very meaningful to the people we serve, and try to get them an answer, a status on their fraud case or claim. And in some cases, this fraudulent activity delayed or interrupted payments that were in process. So you had somebody who was receiving financial assistance, and then their claim was interrupted due to fraudulent activity, and they were just trying to get their financial assistance restarted again. So again, I think the results very meaningful in our ability to to provide a better service. As I said, I like to say we made a number of mistakes as we went through this. If we'd had this solution in place prior to the pandemic, I know we've been better situated to be able to provide support.
Well, that's a good headway in terms of looking ahead, right? I mean, I'm not suggesting we're all waiting for the next pandemic per se, but there's always the next challenge around the corner, right? So walk me through some of the things that you're looking forward to doing in addition to what you guys have already been able to implement between 3CLogic and your active use of ServiceNow.
Yeah. So a couple things. One is, we're, with regard to 3CLogic, we're specifically looking to expand its utilization in sort of the traditional fraud team. Again, that's a group that generates notices, generates phone calls and customer contacts. And again, with the use of ServiceNow, it's a logical extension of the platform so that we can streamline those customer interactions. Organizationally, we're looking at ServiceNow and be able to manage what may not be known by the people that are listening, is we have a lot of interagency interactions. So you may have a claim issue, but it's got to go to tax to get something investigated or wages added to a record. And then it may go to the fraud team and have a fraud issue be resolved before ultimately a determination can be made on the claimant's request for benefits. And so we're looking to use the platform to help us facilitate and manage the interaction and workflow within the department. But the other is government's not typically known for customer service, right? Or delivering good customer service. And the secretary and I have goals to be able to measure, the quality of the service that we provide, and ServiceNow and its engagement and 3CLogic and the tools that it brings really will give us an ability to measure. One is to perform the work in a more efficient and deliver a better quality product, and hopefully measure that through customer engagement and ask for their feedback. So we're looking for those capabilities. And self-help, G, you mentioned it, is so many times when if they just knew the next status, or the payment was made, or what do I do next, is that would resolve the contact without having to wait and speak to a live agent.
Which obviously optimizes your own resources. I think towards the beginning you had mentioned how your staff fluctuates anywhere from almost 90 to 250, but if you're already doing less with more, you don't have to throw, you mentioned throwing people at the problem and brunt force goes away.
It does, and the one thing is, during the pandemic, the federal government provided unique, some additional financial assistance for us to provide these services. As things normalize, that funding goes away, and at some point, not likely this year, because we're still sort of managing through some of the pandemic-related, issues. It'll return to normal, and my staffing will return to 85 to 95 people. Right. And so having these tools in place give us an ability to manage those seasonal fluctuations much better. Hopefully never a pandemic again, but as in our business, we're planning for recessions, right? So as we look at seasonal fluctuations or recessions, again, hopefully never to see something like COVID sort of impact our, our state and our national economy as it did, and the workers, right, that were impacted through this. But it definitely gives us an ability to scale in a efficient way our response and delivery of service.
Yep. So if we took a look at, just sort of recap, three of the takeaways just from today's session, and Dale, feel free to comment. I think there's really three that stand out, right? One, which you just now alluded to, which is the idea that, instead of throwing people at the problem, at some point, how can you leverage technology? And obviously it's usually going to be a mix of technologies, right? So, bringing on technologies by themselves is not necessarily going to be the solution, because if you end up having to, rely on your agents swivel chairing between different platforms of data's in different locations, that in of itself can cause its own bag of headaches. So how can you integrate them in a way where you maintain a seamless workflow that does in fact help scale a team as it did yours? The other is obviously goes back to improving the citizen experience, right? There's this constant obsession about customer experience. And the reality is that, and you highlighted this yourself, we don't ultimately control what channel a customer is going to choose to leverage to communicate with a division such as yours. I would imagine that when it's so time sensitive or emotional, that at some point they may want to go beyond just digital options or self-service and just reach a physical person,
Right.
because there's some comfort there, right? I don't know if you've got anything to add there.
So we do, we've had to virtualize our service delivery because of COVID restrictions, but we do have in-person services. Now we're changing the way we do business, but to your point is we've actually looked to use, ServiceNow to sort of schedule interactions and manage some of those in-person interactions as we reopen facilities. But I think you've addressed the three, key takeaways in that, the pandemic was not something that any state, Delaware included, could have hired enough people to respond to, right? There was just no way to do it. So having a technology, ecosystem in place and partners, right, to help us deliver on the value proposition is critically important. The integration. So I've come out of the business process management, space for years. And integrating telephony and CRMs is not easy. I would tell you that the marriage, the integration of 3CLogic and ServiceNow is a seamless integration, very tightly integrated, provides for great user experience from a customer and from the employee. So critically important to have a solution like that, and then giving us visibility, to the work. The one challenge we had in not having integrated systems and information was, how many do I have? Where is it? How long is it? And who's assigned to work it, right? And so getting that visibility, again, it's scary to look at some of the backlog numbers, but it gave us an ability to measure, mobilize, and sort of plan to attack those backlogs as was needed.
And to do so, and also I know that's not one of the things we talked about, but to do so also in a completely changing work environment, right? People were remote all of a sudden. So you're asking for more insights beyond the typical insights you had, pre the events of the last couple of years, right? So being able to know who's doing what, even though you're not physically operating from the same business location.
Yeah, absolutely. One is adding locations, adding some virtual work, adding new people, and providing tools that were a little more straightforward to utilize. Were all important.
So just to provide context for the group, right, in terms of, who's 3CLogic, and if you're not familiar with ServiceNow, obviously ServiceNow is a platform that specializes in either IT service management, employee workflows, or even customer service management, as well as others. We at 3CLogic, we are an application designed to really extend the ServiceNow platform, really add in customer channels that are not native to the ServiceNow environment, specifically voice and SMS workflows. So that if someone were ever to call or want to send an SMS, or if you would like to reach out to them or communicate with them over SMS, how can you make sure that that experience has the context, the ServiceNow context, presuming that's where you're storing all your data, as done as Daryl and his team within the state of Delaware, so that you can provide meaningful, and intelligent workflows and outcomes, whether it's self-service, voice self-service, whether it's transferring you to the agent that's potentially working on your claim, and everything in between. And we've been doing this within the ServiceNow ecosystem for a number of years for organizations all over the world, including, of course, Daryl and his team. If you have questions for myself or Daryl, you can certainly reach us at info@3CLogic.com, and we can certainly explore how we could potentially have similar impact as some of the use cases that Daryl was able and willing to share. But I'll turn it back over to Heather. Heather, I don't know if there's any questions from the audience that myself or Daryl could potentially tackle here with time remaining.
Yeah, we did get a couple. I will start with this one. I think this one will probably be directed at Daryl, but they asked, what is the overhead on trying to deploy something like this? How long did the initial implementation take?
It's a great question. So the initial implementation was targeted to be between 6 and 8 weeks, and not to any fault of 3CLogic, but we in the state ran into some challenges that took us out to between 10 and 12 weeks. I don't remember the specific time frame, but it was somewhere in that time frame. So it relatively short period of time. The 3CLogic team was great to work with and made all their milestones. Unfortunately, we ran into some things on our side.
Another question that we have is, how do you see the voice channel evolving over time in the context of customer service?
So,
want to go first, Daryl?
Yeah, what I'll say is, we serve a diverse population of individuals, from people entering the workforce to people that are nearing the end of their time in the workforce. And so we obviously see an evolution of our contacts. So adding in virtual agent, chat, SMS, and other communication channels we see as sort of vitally important to be able to communicate in a channel of choice by the people we serve. But we also know that, as we touched on, we have people who want to talk to somebody, and in some cases they want to talk to somebody in person. So we potentially see the voice channel declining somewhat as it gets displaced with other channels. And email, it's crazy to say, is still part of our ecosystem, and our hope is to transform away from sort of email as much as we can into more of a more timely channel of communication.
So I mean, what I would add to that, I don't disagree with anything that Daryl has said. It might be a little bit counterintuitive to hear. We at 3CLogic believe that, call volumes are likely going to go down. In fact, they probably should. For the longest time, call centers, the voice channel has been a catch-all, in part because it was, the other channels were really not very successful at addressing people's needs. When you merge or when you address a voice channel properly, so I don't believe that calling is the problem. I think the problem is the experience itself. If there's no context as to who the caller is, it's going to be really difficult to provide a good experience. And most people only call because they've exhausted all of their options. When deployed properly, in the fashion that Daryl and his team are doing, you offer other people options to self-service, to use knowledge base, to use chatbots and things of that nature. Effectively, what you'll find is that the call center no longer becomes a catch-all. It becomes really an escalation channel. People will call when the issue merits a call, and not because you're obligated or have no other option but to do so. So things like a password reset or common request, no longer do you have to necessarily remain on hold for something as basic as that. But if you do have a more time-sensitive inquiry, for example, a fraud issue or a benefits claim, I mean, personally, I'd like to have a human contact, because it's hard to find a knowledge base that will answer every potential question under the sun. So I think what you'll find is call volumes will go down. I think the voice channel is still going to be an important way to maintain a relationship with your audience base at a time that's typically critical. So I think what you'll find is call durations may last longer because you have the luxury to spend time serving those individuals. And it's also good for your employees. They get to spend their time addressing complex issues instead of, having to do some, repetitive tasks. So I agree with there. I think volumes will go down. I think it's a goal that we should all strive for. And that way, voice as a channel can be specifically leveraged for where it's best, best suited.
And I just to one point you made is that leveraging the human capital in the most efficient manner, which are on those complex tasks and transactions that can't be resolved through other channels, right? Because at the end, people want an answer and a resolution to their issue. And for many, that can be done offline or in a non-voice channel. But in some, as you said, when you've got thousands of dollars on the line and you're trying to make a decision of, what are you going to get money so you can pay your rent or your car payment or put food on the table, diapers or formula for the baby, those are all things that they want to talk to somebody now, right? So.
Yeah.
And the last question we just received, which kind of piggybacks off what you just touched on about call centers, but they would like to know, how do you see the call center evolving given the new emphasis on remote work?
So from a state of Delaware perspective, we, like other employers, have employees that are expressing an interest, to work remotely. Having a platform that extends access to our systems while maintaining visibility to, the quantity of interactions and the quality of those interactions. We now are in a position to be able to deliver on sort of the employee wish to be able to work, remotely. Before the pandemic, again, access was from within the four walls of a state facility, right? And so we had to quickly adapt and provide access. ServiceNow gave us an ability to extend access to some critical information and add additional resources. And then look at the ability to provide employees the ability to work remotely. And that's just not in our, people who are doing customer contact, but again, having employees that may be in our tax group that are doing mostly behind the scenes work, but have dependencies on other employees within the department. So maintaining visibility to that workflow between individuals and departments, makes that possible.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, I think most would agree that remote work is no longer a temporary outcome of the last few years. There's going to be a permanent aspect to it. I think it'll vary from institution, public and private. It may very well take its own variation within the public sector versus the private sector. But I do think there's a couple net benefits. One, of course, is the ability to be able to hire outside of the immediate geography of a specific building where people typically in the past would obviously go to work. The others, of course, there's security and risk and redundancy components, right? I don't think anyone really anticipated the last few years, but it certainly made them rethink what redundancies would look like, including the redundancy of human capital. Can someone operate as effectively from home as they did from the office, and can you supervise a workforce as effectively from a distance as you might have had when everyone was physically in the same building? So I think the contact center, the call center model is going to evolve just as much as the voice channel the channel itself is going to evolve. But the technology is there to facilitate it, which wasn't the case. You no longer have to be tethered to a desk phone, a physical desk phone, as might have been the case a few years ago. So I think it's actually going to open up some doors in terms of what the model can do now, because there's more flexibility by default. So I think that it has yet to play out, but I think it's interesting. I think to Daryl's point, call centers are still going to play a role, but in what fashion within the broader scope of how you manage your operations, I think that's going to vary, and I think it's actually still a bit in flux.
Thank you, Daryl and G. I do not see any more questions in the Q&A pod. So at this time, I'd like to go ahead and thank all of our participants as well as our speakers for being with us today. We hope the information you received during this webinar has been helpful. If you have any further questions or would like to request more information, please feel free to reach out. Thank you again and have a great day.